Alagaësia is a world that was once kept in balance by the dragon riders, powerful guardians magically linked to their dragons. But when they were destroyed, that balance was replaced by one man, Galbatorix, who used dragon power to build his own empire. And it is in this kind of world that the story begins. Eragon was 15 and the pantry was empty. Winter was coming fast. His family needed meat, so he went hunting in the Spine, a chain of wild mountains that no sensible person entered. Eragon went there regularly. For 3 days, he tracked a doe with a lame leg and almost had her when the sky exploded. Literally, a ring of trees burned down to their roots, deer scattering in every direction, and in the middle of the blackened circle, a blue stone. Oval, smooth as silk, lighter than it should have been, hollow inside. Clearly not natural. Eragon took it because he was hungry and hoped he could sell it. Sloane, the local butcher, would not even touch it. The moment he heard it came from the Spine, he stepped back from the counter as if the stone were red hot. Horst, the blacksmith with a heart bigger than his fists, paid for the meat with his own money and asked no questions. The traders who came to Carvajal every year did not know what to make of the stone either. Murloc, the dealer in oddities, measured it, weighed it, tapped it, and shrugged. Harder than diamond, hollow inside, made of an unknown material. Maybe worth a fortune in a big city. Maybe worth nothing. Not here. The stone ended up on a shelf in Eragon's room and started squeaking at night. Then it began to rock. Then it cracked open, and a dragon crawled out. Small, blue, confused, and extremely hungry. When Eragon touched her without thinking, a wave of icy fire ran through his whole body and a silver oval burned itself into his palm. Gedwe Ignatia, the shining palm, the mark of a rider, a mark that, in Galbatorix's empire, meant a death sentence. Eragon named her Saphira. She, when she learned to speak a few weeks later, said only his name. In a tone so solemn it sounded like they had just made an irreversible pact. Maybe they had. For the next few weeks, Eragon fed her stolen sausages, kept her secret from his Uncle Garrow and his cousin Roran, and built her bigger hiding places as she grew. And she grew at a speed that should have worried him more than it did. Dragons do not stop growing. Ever. That fact would hit him much harder later. For now, Saphira fit on his shoulder, then across his back, then ran beside him through the forest with the grace of a 6-week-old puppy and the same enthusiasm for anything that moved. The bond between them grew with her, not just the telepathic one, though that was strange enough by itself, like someone had opened a window inside his head that he had never even known was there. Saphira was someone. Complex, at times alien, with a sense of humor Eragon did not always understand. When the traders came to Carvajal, they brought bad news. Urgles, humanoid monsters with horns and crushing arms, were moving south in numbers no one had seen in decades. Something disturbing was happening in the Empire. The Varden, rebels who had fought King Galbatorix for more than 100 years, were said to have made an alliance with them. Or maybe they had not, depending on who you asked. And with the traders came the old storyteller Brom. Eragon had known him since childhood, gray-haired, stooped, with bushy eyebrows and a long beard. That winter he told by the fire the story of the dragon riders, their rise, their golden age, and their fall, in the voice of a man mourning something personal, not repeating a legend from a book. Eragon listened more closely than ever before, because now those stories were about him. He already knew he was a rider. He still did not know what that really meant. Then the Razak came. 2 hooded figures rode into Carvajal one morning and began asking questions about the stone. Their voices, smooth, with a strange hiss underneath, made people tremble with a fear they could not explain. Horst warned Eragon to go home. Eragon promised he would, then slipped around a corner to see who they were talking to. Sloane. The butcher was telling them about the stone, about where it had been found. Eragon heard enough and started running for the farm. But before he could reach the forest, Saphira sensed his panic. A dragon's instinct in the face of mortal danger says only one thing: run, now, as far as possible. She snatched him into the air before he could protest. He spent the night in the mountains, frozen and with his legs scraped bloody by the dragon's scales. In the morning, they came back. Too late. Garrow lay in the ruins of his own house. Something had ripped the building apart from the inside. Beams shattered, roof tiles scattered. They found his uncle under a heap of wood, alive but covered in chalk-white burns that leaked a clear liquid with a sweet, rotten smell. Gertrude, the local healer, did what she could. The fever would not break. The wounds would not heal. He lived for a few more days. Then he did not. Eragon sat beside the bed in Horst's house, staring at his uncle's face, calm now, with a sprig of hemlock on his chest, and felt something inside him go cold. He had never really had a mother. His Aunt Marion had died years ago. And now Garrow. Everyone who had ever tried to raise him was gone. At last, Saphira asked what he meant to do. She said, "Do not live," but in a tone that meant something else. It meant either truly live or do not bother at all. She said dragons and riders existed to attempt the impossible, that it was their destiny, that running was worse than death. Eragon replied that it was a beautiful philosophy, but right now he would rather kill 2 very specific men in black cloaks. Saphira decided that was reason enough to get up. Brom appeared just before they left. Eragon was stealing hides from Gedrick and meat from Sloane, with no guilt at all about the second one, when the old storyteller stepped out from behind the trees with a pack on his back, a sword at his side, and dried blood on his temple. He knew about Saphira. He knew about the mark on Eragon's hand. He knew what the Razak were, and he intended to go after them anyway. He asked only if he could come along. Eragon asked who he really was. Brom said he had a complicated past and had no intention of explaining it to everyone who asked. Then he pulled a sword from his pack. Zarrock, a blade red as blood, with a pommel set with a ruby the size of an egg, balanced so perfectly it felt like an extension of the hand. A rider's sword, Brom said. Made by elven smiths, forever sharp, unbreakable. It had belonged to someone important. To whom? He did not say. Why an old storyteller from a tiny village had it? He did not say that either. Eragon trusted him mostly because Saphira accepted him. Dragons are rarely wrong about people. Rarely. The three of them left together. In Therinsford, Brom bought horses. Before that, one of the local thugs had tried to charge them 5 crowns to cross the bridge because, according to him, the bridge belonged to him. Brom paid without a word, stumbled on the way out, grabbed the man's arm, and apologized. 2 minutes later, he had his own money back, along with the rest of the man's purse. When an angry shout came from across the river, Brom asked Eragon to let him know if he saw any guards. They bought the horses from Haberth. Snowfire, a white stallion with a proud stride, went to Brom. A calmer bay gelding went to Eragon. When the boy reached toward the horse with his mind by instinct, the way he had learned to do with Saphira, the animal looked at him quietly with damp eyes and stopped fidgeting. Brom frowned. He said most riders had to practice for years before they could make contact with anything other than their own dragon. Eragon named the horse Kadok, after a grandfather he had never known. Before they left Therinsford, Brom disappeared for a while. He came back with news. The Razak had bought horses there a few days earlier and ridden out at a gallop like demons fleeing a priest. Their trail led east toward Yazuak. Beyond the valley stretched the plain. Eragon was not ready for it. He had spent his whole life among mountains and hills that defined the horizon, gave shelter, made the world feel like it had walls. Here, there was nothing. A flat sea of dead grass all the way to the horizon, where the land blurred into the sky without a clear line between them. The sky was too big. The wind had nowhere to stop. He felt like a mouse exposed under the eye of a hunting bird. The first day was bad. The wind was cold and stubborn, pushing into every opening in his clothes and never letting up. His lips split and bled. His eyes burned from the dust. Fire would not catch no matter how many times they tried. Brom knelt by a bush, looked at it, moved a few twigs, struck the flint. Smoke. A second time. Smoke. The third time, he cursed. Brissinger. And suddenly flames appeared, as if the word itself had weight, as if the air had obeyed it. Eragon watched. Brom said the wood must already have been smoldering inside. Eragon said nothing. But he remembered. In the evenings, Brom made him fight with a staff. The first lesson ended with Eragon flat on the ground, blood on his face, before he even understood what had happened, and explained that a real enemy would not soften his blows, so neither would he. Eragon thought it was cruel. Saphira thought it was funny. On the third day, the storm came. A cathedral of clouds, so tall and wide it looked like part of another more serious world. Arches, columns, towers of vapor, all in shades of navy and black. Beautiful and merciless. Saphira was flying high above them when Eragon saw a wave racing through the grass, the blades bending to the ground one after another as if something invisible were flying just above the earth. Only a second later did he realize it was the wind. He turned in the saddle and shouted aloud, and with his mind at the same time, land. The dragon dropped at once, but the plain was flat and open, and the storm was already too close. She only had time to turn, trying to buy a few seconds, when the wall of air hit with enough force to nearly tear Eragon from the saddle. Kadok dug his hooves into the ground and shuddered. The wind ripped at the horse's manes, tore dust from the earth, and turned the world into a spinning brown wall. Eragon saw Saphira land hard, feet planted, claws deep in the dirt, wings beginning to fold, and then the wind caught the still open span of her wings and lifted her like a paper kite. For a moment she hung motionless in the air, wings beating in 2 directions at once. Then the storm flipped her onto her back. Eragon threw down the reins and ran. He fell in the sand, got up. The wind knocked him off balance and sent him forward again, this time onto his stomach. He got up once more, blood on his hands, and kept running because thinking would have taken time he did not have. Saphira was still struggling. Her wings kept filling with air before she could fold them, each gust wrenching them open again. Eragon reached the right wing and grabbed it. The wind caught Saphira at that exact moment, and the spikes along her back missed his head by inches. He jumped to the left side, grabbed the tip of the wing and shoved with all his strength as Saphira tried to fold it. The wind fought them for 1 second, 2, 3, and then gave way. Saphira lay on the ground, wings pinned tight to her sides. She was shaking. Eragon leaned against her flank, out of breath, with sand between his teeth. "Are you hurt?" She hesitated. "I did not break anything. The wind would not let me go. I was helpless." A shiver ran through her body. That shocked her more than the storm itself. A dragon that could kill a horse with one strike of her paw had been flipped by air like a child's toy. Eragon stroked her neck and said nothing because there was nothing to say. It lasted as long as it lasted. Then the storm moved on, and the plain on the other side was completely changed. Gold, shadow, wet grass shining like 1,000 tiny suns. The setting sun painted the clouds orange and pink. Even blades of grass cast shadows along his pillars. Saphira stretched out her neck and roared into the sky, not in anger, just because she was alive and the storm was gone and the sky belonged to her again. The horses jumped sideways. Brom and Eragon looked at each other and, despite everything, smiled. They made camp, too tired even for training. They fell asleep before the fire had fully died. Somewhere to the east waited Yazuak, 4 days away, and in it, maybe, a trace of the Razak. Eragon lay against Saphira's side and looked at the stars. The plain at night was different from the plain by day. Dark, quiet, with a horizon so low the stars seemed to reach all the way down to the earth. So many stars, too many to take in. He thought about Garrow, about Roran, sitting in Therinsford now and not knowing, about the house, now only a pile of burned beams, about the Razak, whose voices he could not forget, smooth, cold, with that hiss underneath, as if something else were speaking through human mouths. He thought about Brom, sleeping on the other side of the fire with a rider's sword and a secret so large it barely fit inside him. The old storyteller who had said Briesinger and the fire had obeyed, who knew everything about the Razak, who wore a sapphire ring and spoke about the riders in the voice of someone who had lost something personal. Saphira rumbled in her sleep. Heat came from her sides like a hearth. Eragon still did not know who Braum really was. He did not know what Zarrock meant in the language of its first owner. He did not know that the plane was only the first chapter, and the Razak only one of many reasons the world would try to kill him. He knew only that he was a rider, that he had a dragon, that Garrow was dead, and that revenge, which 2 days ago had been the only reason to get out of bed, was slowly beginning to make room for something else. He did not have a name for it yet. For now, it was enough that it was there. The plane ended at the river, and there was nothing poetic about it. There was water, there were dead people, and there was Eragon, who had just understood that the world was much bigger and much crueler than he had thought. Yazuak, a small village by the Nino River, silence instead of barking dogs, houses with broken windows, and in the middle of the square, a pile, not of wood. Eragon vomited beside his horse. Braum said nothing. Urgles, their work. A crow landed on that spear with a hungry look, and Eragon shot it without thinking. Then he put another arrow on the string and realized his stomach was turning again. The Urgles had not gone far. 2 were still hiding in the empty houses, and one of them knocked Eragon out of the saddle with a punch so strong that for a moment the sky and the ground seemed to change places. Eragon got up, saw what was in front of him, turned around and started to run. The plan was simple: pull them away from Braum. The alley ended in a dead end. 2 Urgles with swords stood in front of him, and Eragon stood there with a bow, a wall behind his back, and the image of the pile still burning in his mind. Then something rose inside him. Not courage like in stories, not cold determination, just simple fury that this could even exist. "Brissinger," he said. The arrow burst into blue fire and hit the first Urgle in the forehead. The shockwave went on, and the second one fell as if its legs had been cut out from under it. Eragon leaned against the wall and slowly slid down to the ground because his legs stopped working. The Gedwe Ignatia faded. He was alive. He could barely breathe and half his strength was gone, but he was alive. Braum finally gave him the lesson he had been waiting to give. He stood over Eragon with a pot of cold water and said that Eragon had no idea what he was doing, that he could have killed himself, that Urgles were not practiced with sticks, that magic cost as much energy as the work itself, and that next time, before shouting a spell, he should make sure he would still be able to stand afterward. Eragon listened. He did not have the strength to do anything else. Saphira watched all of this from the side. When Braum finished, she said to Eragon in his mind that he had grown older. She said it in a tone that sounded like a compliment, though also a little like an epitaph for someone more innocent. A few days later, Eragon realized that Braum was hiding something. Not one secret, many. Ordered, careful, and deliberately kept silent. He knew more about dragons than a normal storyteller should know. He knew more about the Razak than a man who had only heard rumors should know. He had a rider's sword. He could speak with Saphira. 3 times he had used a word from the ancient language, and 3 times something had happened. Eragon listened by means of scrying through a puddle, a skill he had discovered only recently, and one far too useful for how quickly he had learned it. He sat in bushes under the window of Jihad's office and listened while Braum spoke about someone named Ajihad, about the Varden, about the egg he had stolen from Galbatorix's castle, about Morzan, the last of the Forsworn, whom he had killed. Braum had killed one of the Forsworn. Tiram was the first city Eragon had ever seen with real walls. 100 feet high, 30 feet thick, arrow slits every few yards, towers at the corners, a citadel in the center. Everything planned for defense, lower houses near the wall, taller ones closer to the middle, so archers in the center could shoot over the outer buildings. Eragon thought it looked like a city ready for siege. Then he understood that it was ready for siege because that was its normal state. The sea brought pirates, Urgles came from the land, and the Empire was far away and did not always hurry. They entered through the south gate after Braum acted like a mad old man, while Eragon acted like the patient young man caring for him, and convinced the guard that the old man had simply gotten lost. It worked better than anything else Eragon could have invented. Jihad lived in Tarim, a merchant with a long scar across his bald head, sad eyes, and a library covering one whole wall. He knew Braum was alive. He knew what Saphira was. He knew enough that Eragon understood he was not just some old friend. His wife Helen opened the door with the face of someone who had stopped expecting good news a long time ago, and had learned to greet all other news with the same expression. Dinner at that table felt like a visit to the dentist, necessary and painful for everyone. Angela lived beside a herb stall and had a werecat with her. Eragon went in because he was curious. He came out with a handful of prophecies he would rather not know, and with the name Selena wrapped around his mind like a bullet. The name of his mother, who had visited the same herbalist years before and had heard her own prophecy, and supposedly regretted it. The werecat was named Solumbum, and he looked like a thin wild animal crossed with contempt for the whole human race. He spoke in thoughts. He told Eragon 2 things: that when he needed a weapon, he should look under the roots of the Manoa tree, and that when all seemed lost, he should go to the rock of Kuthian and speak his name. Angela told him about a long life, about choices that would keep multiplying, about love from someone of noble blood, about betrayal from his own family, and about the fact that one day he would leave Alagaësia forever and never return. Eragon stepped back into the street and stood for a moment, squinting in the sun, trying to decide what to do with all of this. He decided, for now, nothing. There were more urgent matters. The trade records of Tarim were guarded by the administrator Brand, a man who refused even a bribe, which Braum considered an event as rare and annoying as snow in the middle of summer. So they went at night. Jayod let them in through a side door of the castle, and for nearly 2 hours they checked scroll after scroll, looking for traces of Seether oil, a rare substance that melts living flesh and leaves everything else untouched, and whose burns Eragon had seen on Garrow's skin in the last days before his death. Solumbum warned Eragon that soldiers were coming. Eragon passed the warning to Braum without explanation. Braum did not ask. They were quick enough. They got out before the soldiers arrived, magically locked the door behind them, stood there looking innocent when the patrol found them, and were politely escorted out with apologies for the inconvenience. Jihad's parchment showed 3 regular deliveries to Drasleona, not to a jeweler, not in an amount 1 craftsman could use, not even 10 craftsmen. Drasleona and Helgrain, something Braum wanted to show Eragon instead of trying to explain. They left the next morning. Jihad said goodbye to Braum like a man who was not sure he would ever see him again. Helen stood in the doorway and said nothing, and Braum told her something about her husband, that she had a good man and should take care of him. There was no cruelty in it. There was something worse. Truth. Helen slammed the door. Outside the walls, Saphira waited in a grove, clearly unhappy after another week of hiding. Eragon got on Kadok and began what he had been planning for days. He asked Braum directly. Braum could have said it was none of Eragon's business. He could have answered with a riddle. Instead, he stopped Snowfire in the middle of the road and looked at Eragon for a moment like a man weighing 2 heavy things and knowing that neither was light. Then he told the story. The Varden. The resistance against Galbatorix. 3 dragon eggs taken from the king's castle. Or maybe not all stolen. Maybe one was hidden and kept secret. Jihad and the secret passage into the fortress. Morzan, the last of the Forsworn, the strongest of the traitors, the man who stood at the birth of the tyranny. And the fight Braum survived while Morzan did not. I killed him. He said it simply, like something that had been necessary and had been done. A few days later, Eragon broke his arm. Not in battle, not in a magical experiment. He slipped on wet moss near a stream because he wanted to inspect a strange track on the other side and landed on his wrist. Braum put splints on it with the face of a man trying not to laugh and not to cry at the same time. The Urgles attacked them that same night, not 2, 12, and someone stood above them because the leader told Eragon that their master wanted to speak with him. Their master, someone who could gather Urgles, someone who knew Eragon existed and wanted him captured alive. A third force in Alagaësia, besides the Empire and the Varden, or maybe a tool of one of those two, or maybe something else entirely. Eragon refused, insulted the leader with simple precision, and then, instead of killing the Urgles, only stunned them, and fainted, because stunning 12 of them took that much energy. Braum spent 2 days hunting down the ones who escaped. He found 9. 3 were still free, carrying a story to tell and information for whoever wanted to know where the rider was. When Eragon woke, Braum looked like a man who had a lot to say and had decided to say all of it at once. He did. It took some time. The main point was this: brains matter. Eragon should use his more often. Leaving Urgles alive had been a mistake. Landing in front of them on the road had been another mistake. And in general, the whole chain of decisions he had made that night had been spectacularly bad for someone who was supposed to be a rider. Eragon admitted that it was true. Then he asked who the Urgles' master might be. Braum did not answer at once. He said he did not know, and that this was the worst option among several bad ones, because if someone had managed to gather such a large group of Urgles under one command, then either that person had magic far beyond anything Eragon could face right now, or had something the Urgles feared more than their own self-interest. Neither possibility sounded good. Eragon's arm healed over many weeks. During that time, Braum taught him to read. Daily lessons by the fire with a piece of parchment and a stick for drawing letters in the dirt. Eragon sat hunched over, staring at the letters like someone trying to memorize shapes that had nothing to do with any picture in his mind. After a week, he could read slowly. After 2 weeks, he could read. Braum did not say he was proud of him. He said Eragon had finally reached the level where he could begin learning something useful. At the same time, he was learning to scry. Draumercopa, 2 words that turned a still surface of water into a window. He saw Saphira in the clouds. He saw Roran, sitting somewhere Eragon had never been, with a frown that made him look more like Garrow than ever before. And he saw the woman in the cell. That was a mistake that should not have been possible. You cannot scry a place you have never seen. You cannot scry a face from your own dream. And yet the image appeared. A dark cell, a candle, black hair, and a woman who raised her head and looked straight at him, as if she knew he was there. Eragon let go of the magic and sat still for several minutes. It had not been a dream. She existed, and she was imprisoned. They rode toward Drasleona along the mountains, passing more empty villages and quiet wastelands. Braum taught constantly. Sword fighting, now with Zarrock, not a stick, with magic shields on the blades so their bones would stay unbroken. And every evening ended with a new set of bruises. Magic, a pebble lifting into the air more easily every day. Words of the ancient language learned one by one. The line between effort and exhaustion tested daily and slowly pushed further. The language of the elves, names of plants, names of natural things, grammar patterns that slowly began to make sense. And between all of that, questions. How riders learned magic. How Urgles came to Alagaësia. What would happen when Galbatorix learned that Saphira was growing up? Braum answered some of them. For the rest, he shrugged or said Eragon would understand when he was ready. Eragon accepted that less and less. One evening he asked directly, why had Braum hidden his true identity in Carvajal for so many years? Why had he lived as a storyteller instead of as whatever he really was? Braum was silent for a long moment. Then he said that there are some wounds after which a man never returns to his former shape. That Carvajal had been a place where he could be only an old man with stories to tell, and that for a while that had been enough for him. He did not say what those wounds were. Eragon did not ask. Later, Saphira told him that Braum was mourning someone. She did not know who. She knew it from the way he sometimes looked into the fire. Something dark appeared on the horizon. Eragon stared at it for a moment before he understood that it was not clouds and not mountains. 4 black bare stone peaks rose above the nearby hills like the fingers of a closed hand. Helgrind, Braum said. The dark gates. Drasleona lay at its feet. Eragon felt something inside him shrink. Not exactly fear, more like recognition. This place fit the Razak. Something in the shape of those rocks, and the way they swallowed light, matched what they were. Braum looked at Helgrind and was silent for a moment. Because places like this attract creatures like that, he said. and because the Razak have always preferred to keep an escape upward. Eragon looked at the black peaks and thought about Garrow, the burns, the chalk-white skin, and the sweet, rotten smell of Seether oil. Saphira settled beside him. Her warmth felt like leaning against a wall. "Ready?" she asked. Eragon breathed out. "No," he said honestly, "but that does not matter." They rode toward the city. Weeks on the plains had changed things. Eragon was getting better and better. Then one evening by Lake Leona, during their usual sparring, something happened that neither of them said out loud, but both knew had to happen sooner or later. Eragon knocked Brom's sword out of his hand. The old man stood there breathing hard with empty hands. Then he put his sword back in its sheath and said shortly that he could teach the boy nothing more about sword fighting. Only 3 warriors in the world could defeat him like that. It was a compliment, though Brom said it with the face of a man who had just looked at his own grave. Eragon could have been pleased. He was not. By the fire, Brom explained what a magical duel really was. A brutal game that lasts only moments, where both sides must first break into the other person's mind before doing anything else. Because otherwise, they can kill each other almost at once. Quick thinking matters more than strength. When Eragon asked what he should do if he ever faced such a duel, Brom only shrugged. "Run," he said, "if you can." They rode for many miles to Leona. When the city finally appeared before them, Eragon felt that something was wrong. Leona looked like a place that had lost a war against itself long ago and had accepted it. Crooked streets, leaning houses, mud instead of proper walls and plaster. On the horizon stood Helgrind, stone peaks like broken bones of the earth, and a cathedral built in the same shape, cold and sharp like guilt. Brom explained that the city worshipped Helgrind, cults that cut off their own limbs to be closer to their god. Eragon did not comment. He only said that he would not stay there. They stayed. They rented a room at an inn. That evening they drank. Eragon a little too much, Brom twice as much. Saphira had already shared her opinion about this choice a week earlier, and now she repeated it again. The next morning, while both were trying to recover with tea and ice water, Brom explained the plan. Follow the Seether oil. It had been delivered to the city and was going somewhere. If the trail led to the Razak, this was the way. They split up. Brom went to the palace to play the lute for the servant girls, because servants always know more than they should say. Eragon walked through the market and spoke to workers. That evening, both came back with information. The oil went to the palace. From the palace, it went to Helgrind. Every month, at the full moon, 2 slaves carried supplies there and never returned. Eragon suggested that they should take the place of the slaves. Brom pulled his beard and said it might work. In the morning, Brom left a message on the wall and disappeared. Eragon, with no task and no company, wandered through the city. He came to the slave market, and he almost used magic. What stopped him was a cold thought. Even if he freed them, they would never get out through the city gates. So instead, he walked away and hit a wall with his fist several streets away. Then, partly in anger and partly by accident, he found himself standing in front of the cathedral. He went inside. It was cold, dark, and quiet like a tomb. The stained glass windows showed scenes of anger and despair. The great organ played only when a storm wind passed through the city. Eragon knelt before the altar, not to pray, but to show respect to a place that had stood there a long time and remembered things he did not understand. When he stood up, the Razak were standing in the doorway. What happened next can be said simply. He shot, ran, broke doors open with magic, jumped through walls, caught the edge of a fence with only his fingertips, and somehow landed on the other side. The Razak behind him, soldiers in front, and the gate already closing before both groups. Then Brom came riding in on a horse with his staff in his hand and cleared a line of pikemen with one word. Eragon held the gate open with magic. They burst out of Leona in a cloud of dust before anyone understood what had happened. Outside the walls, Saphira was waiting. She looked at them with the expression that meant, "I told you so." Leona was far behind them, but the Razak knew where to look. Someone in the palace must have warned them. They rode at night across the dry plain, with wind blowing sand into their teeth. All the time, Eragon felt that something was coming, and all the time he told himself it was only nerves. They stopped between 2 large rocks without a fire. They ate cold food. Then Eragon saw something from the corner of his eye, something that should not have moved. When he turned to look, he was hit on the back of the head. He woke up with his hands tied. The Razak were sitting nearby with his packs. Saphira had a muzzle on her snout, and chains held her wings tight to her sides. Zar Rock lay on the ground, while one Razak looked at it with that strange, hungry attention they show when something interests them. Eragon tried to reach for magic and could not remember a single word. The drug was working. Brom lay nearby unconscious. The Razak were talking about whether to kill him. One said it would save time. The other said the king had ordered them both kept alive. The first shrugged and said they could always say Brom died during capture. They agreed. Then something whistled through the air. An arrow struck one Razak in the arm. The second almost took another arrow. Someone in the dark was shooting, and none of them could see who it was. The Razak fled. Before leaving, one of them threw a dagger at Eragon. Brom threw himself in front of the boy. The dagger hit the old man with a dull sound. Then a stranger sat down by the fire. He introduced himself as Murtaugh. Murtaugh treated Eragon's broken ribs, asked several questions, and answered none of them. Eragon tested his mind and hit a wall. Hard, closed, perfect. This was not something someone had simply learned. It was something he just was. Together they carried Brom to a cave in a sandstone cliff. Saphira carried him on a rough stretcher. Eragon used magic to heal him, drawing strength from the dragon. Together they could do more than alone. The wound closed, but something inside Brom was still wrong. Brom woke and slept. His fever grew worse. At last he opened his eyes, asked for wine, and told Eragon to wash his right hand. When the brown dye came off, the Gedwe Agnasia shone on the old man's palm. Brom had been a rider. Long ago, when he was young, he had been chosen, and had become friends with Morzan, who had trained at the same time before Morzan became a traitor. Later, Brom's dragon died. Her name had been Saphira. Eragon said nothing. Brom spoke slowly, with breaks between sentences. He warned Eragon never to let himself be separated from his dragon. He asked for a blessing, and when Eragon bowed his head, Brom whispered 7 words in the ancient language into his ear. He said they were to be used only in great need. And he died. Eragon buried Brom on top of the sandstone rock. He used magic so that a 4-sided stone spire rose from the rock. He carved words into it saying that Brom had been a dragon rider, and to him, a second father. Saphira came to the grave and touched it with her nose. The stone changed. It turned pale and clear. Lines of diamonds spread through it. Under the crystal surface, Brom's face could be seen, calm like a sleeping man. I gave him the only gift I had, Saphira said. Eragon stood by the grave until sunset. Then he went back down. That night, he dreamed again of the imprisoned woman. This time, blood was running from her fingers. Saphira knew the name. Dormnad, Gilead. Brom had told her more than he had told Eragon, because he had feared he might not live long enough to say it himself. Murtaugh went to the city alone, because Gilead was a real military town, and Eragon with the Gedway Ignatia on his hand would stand out there like a fire in the night. Dormnad agreed to meet the next morning at dawn. In the darkest hour of the night, Eragon felt a tingling in his hand. There were horses around the camp. Saphira said they smelled of something unknown. Together with Murtaugh, he got ready, and then an Urgal attacked from behind with a pickaxe. Brizinger, said Eragon, and the Urgal burst into blue fire. Eragon turned and understood at once that it had been a trick to distract him. More came out of the darkness. He killed 3. The 4th hit him on the head with a club. He woke in a cell. His head pounded like a drum, and the words of the ancient language slipped from his memory like water through fingers. The drug again. He looked out the low window. Gilead, the Empire. Through the small opening in the door, he saw a line of soldiers carrying a woman. Black hair, leather armor, an empty sword sheath at her side. When her hair moved away from her face, Eragon gasped. Pointed ears. She was an elf. The same one he had seen in his dreams. Behind the soldiers walked a man in a black cloak. Rust-colored eyes, filed teeth, a shade. Eragon sank to the floor and began refusing food and water. The drug was in the water. If he lasted long enough, his strength would come back. The shade came to him alone, without soldiers, as confident as a man who had never known defeat. He wanted Eragon's true name. Eragon pretended to be dull and confused and said that his name was Du Sundavar Freyor. Death to shadows in the ancient language. The shade sat still for a moment. Then he stood and said he would return tomorrow to talk about names. That night, Eragon lifted the blanket with his mind. The door opened without a sound. A corridor, dead-looking torches, cells on both sides. Eragon looked for the elf and for Zarok. Before he could check more than one cell, someone appeared out of the darkness with a bow, bearded, in torn clothes. Murtaugh. With a false beard, having entered through the kitchen chute and with a bribe already used. Together they took down a patrol. Eragon threatened a soldier with burning sand until the man told them which cell held the elf. The shade was waiting for them in the great hall. Murtaugh and Eragon fought together. The shade played with them like toys. Eragon did not have enough strength for magic. He had not fasted long enough. Just as the shade knocked Zarok from his hand, a huge hole burst open in the roof. Saphira flew in. The shade took an arrow between the eyes. He blew away and vanished, leaving only a pile of clothes. The soldiers ran from the dragon. The ones who did not run were lucky only until the roof began to fall on them. Saphira grabbed them all and rose into the night sky. Several arrows pierced the wing membranes. One stuck deep in muscle. Even in the air, while holding the elf, Eragon thought everything would now be fine. He had no idea how wrong he was. Saphira landed. Eragon pulled the arrow from her shoulder. Murtaugh held the wing. The dragon bit down on a tree trunk, and Eragon sealed the wound with words from the ancient language. They laid the elf on a blanket. Eragon removed her clothes and saw her back. Scabs, scars from hot iron, bruises layer upon layer. Someone had done this carefully and for a long time. All night and half the next day, Eragon healed her with magic words, while Saphira gave him strength when his own ran out. When he finally stood up, his hands were shaking. The world swayed under his feet for a moment. The elf was breathing, but she still did not wake. They turned south, soldiers from Gilead behind them, the Razak probably already coming, the unconscious elf on Saphira's back. Murtaugh suggested the only thing that made sense. Leave the Empire. The Haderach Desert lay to the east, and beyond it the Beor Mountains, and beyond them, the Varden. Eragon did not know how they would find water in the desert for the horses and for Saphira. Kneeling on the ground, he discovered by accident that under the dry sand there was a wet layer. He pulled it upward, not changing it, just drawing it to the surface. It worked. It did not kill him. The plan was ready. After 2 days of riding through heat and sand, the Beor Mountains rose on the horizon. Eragon stopped and simply stared at them. They filled half the sky, and their peaks could not even be seen. Murtaugh muttered that he had known they were big, but he had not expected this. That night, by the fire, Eragon knelt beside the elf and carefully reached toward her mind. He touched a clear, sharp mind that caught him in less than a second and began crushing him. He had only one chance. He cried out in the ancient language that he was a rider and a friend. The pressure eased. Unfriendly and cautious, the elf allowed contact. She told him her name. Arya. She told him she had been poisoned. Skil Nabra. A poison for which only the Varden or her own people had the cure. She said that without it she would die in 3, at most 4 days. She showed him the way. Lake Costa Myrna. The Bear's Tooth River. A stone struck against the rock by the waterfall. And the words that would open the entrance. Eragon told Murtaugh where they had to go. Murtaugh said he would not go to the Varden. Eragon said, then at least get me to the lake. Murtaugh agreed. He looked like a man who already knew he would regret it. Murdoch turned around. In the voice of someone who had carried this too long, he said, "My father is Morzan, the first and last of the Forsworn." Murdoch takes off his shirt by the fire and turns his back. A scar cuts across his whole back, from shoulder to hip, thin, white, and straight like a sword cut. He speaks quickly, as if he is afraid that if he slows down, he will stop talking forever. He was 3 years old. Morzan was drunk and angry, and he threw a sword at his own son, then walked away. The same sword Eragon now carries at his side. Eragon stands with his hand on Zarok's hilt and says nothing. Slave hunters attacked them near a small lake. 20 riders with worn scabbards and the faces of men who saw profit. They realized the elf lying on the horse was really an elf, and they started thinking about her price. Saphira struck from the air. Eragon sent balls of fire among them. Murtaugh cut from the saddle. The hunters fled. Behind them, they left only Trax and Torkenbrand, their leader, who did not reach his horse in time. Murtaugh cut off his head. Eragon shouted at him for 5 minutes, then said that the life of a stranger was not more important than his own, and that Eragon did not understand because he had never lived in that kind of fear, that Murtaugh had lived in it since birth. Eragon turned away and told them to move. That same night, they saw a column of Urgles. Saphira said they were much larger than the ones they had seen before. Murtaugh said one word. Cull. The elite. 8 feet tall, able to run without sleep. It takes 5 men to kill one. A whole force was chasing them. And then a horn sounded behind them. The Cull were coming out of the forest. Before Eragon can ask another question, a horn sounds behind them. Urgles come out of the forest much too fast for a normal chase. The only way forward is along a narrow shore, so tight that Saphira has to walk in the water, while the horses scrape their sides against wet rock. The Urgles are already on both sides. Their leader points at Saphira with one gesture, and the army splits like water, moving around the lake from the left and the right. Saphira decides not to wait. She dives at the first line of Urgles without warning. Through their bond, Eragon feels a flash of pure, cold rage, and for a moment he understands that the dragon simply cannot stand aside and watch anyone come close to her rider. She grabs one Cull, lifts him into the air, and drops him into the lake in pieces. A cloud of arrows hits her wings. She dives under the water, rises again with her jaws open, and breaks the spear of the one aiming at her eye. Then she pulls back and blocks the way, sitting between water and land, snapping her jaws too close for the Urgles to shoot without hitting their own. "I stopped them," she warns through the bond. "But hurry, I cannot hold them long." Eragon and Murtaugh run along the shore, the horses running with them. Wet stones slip under their feet. At the waterfall there is only a stone wall and no exit. Eragon shouts the elf's password in the ancient language. He strikes the stone against the rock, then harder, hurting his hand, and nothing happens. Eragon tries to understand that the whole plan has been reversed from the beginning. Then he says, they have to go through the waterfall. The horses understand that the Urgles will eat them, so they jump first. Murtaugh jumps after them. Eragon jumps last, closing his eyes for a split second. The waterfall crushes him. There is current, foam, darkness. Then a strong hand grabs him by the neck and pulls him onto the stone beach on the right side. The rescuer is not Murtaugh. It is a dwarf. He reaches only to Eragon's elbow, has a beard braided into plaits, and looks at the waterfall with clear longing, as if he regrets that instead of saving riders he could not join the fight. His name is Auric. Behind Eragon, arrows fly from the stone wall, not at him, but at the Urgles on the other side, who now have nowhere to run. The stone wall opens into double doors. The tunnel is 30 feet high, the Varden. But before anyone says anything kind, a bald man in purple and gold robes appears with a dagger pressed to Murtaugh's throat. Eragon learns several things very quickly. First, the Varden do not trust anyone who has not been fully searched. Second, this man, who has no name because Ajihad has 2 such men and neither needs one, is one of the twins, and he can search a person's mind with the brutal precision of a surgeon working without painkiller. Arya, pale and barely alive, needs Tunavor nectar immediately because the poison Skilnabrag is destroying her body more with every minute. Eragon allows his mind to be searched. Saphira blocks the most important memories, the words of the ancient language, Angela's prophecy, Murtagh's identity, and at the same time she softens the pain because the twin is not only looking for information, he's looking for weak places and pressing his fingers into each one. When the twin finally pulls back, Eragon uses Saphira's strength to stay on his feet. For a moment, he lies on the cold marble and breathes. He can be trusted, the twin mutters, as if each word costs him something physical. He's not our enemy. Murtaugh refuses. He does not say it with pride or drama. He sits against the wall, a dagger at his throat, and says no. His mind is the only sanctuary he has left, and he will not open it to these 2 men under any condition. The twin presses a finger to his forehead and tries to break in by force. Murtaugh fights with his face tight like a fist, veins standing out on his neck, and wins. Auric pulls the twin away with a gesture that is impressive for his size and asks loudly whether Murtaugh can use magic. No. Then what are you afraid of? The twin gives up. Murtaugh is taken to a cell, not a dungeon. Eragon is taken to a marble room. On the other side of the corridor, a lock clicks shut. Eragon sits beside Saphira, rests his head against her side, and says nothing for a long time. Saphira hums quietly. We have as many enemies here as in the Empire. He nods, too tired even to argue. Murtaugh, in his corner, tells him that they got nothing from him and asks about Zarok at Eragon's side. Eragon says he did not reveal that he knew. Murtaugh nods. Thank you. In the morning, Auric comes with an orange lantern and leads them through Trondheim. Eragon has seen cities of the Empire. He has seen Gilead, Tyrm, and Darret. None of them prepared him for walking out of a tunnel into a volcano crater. Farthendur is too large to take in at once. The walls of the volcano rise 5 miles upward and narrow toward the opening where sunlight comes in. In the middle of the crater stands Trondheim. A paved road leads straight to its gates between 2 lines of people, dwarves and humans, hundreds, maybe thousands, all silent and staring. They are staring at Saphira. Eragon sits on her back and suddenly understands that this silent crowd is waiting to see whether he is afraid. He tries to smile. His lips shake but do not form anything convincing. He raises his hand in a gesture he himself knows is pathetic. Someone claps. 1 second of silence. And then the crowd explodes. Eragon, who has never had more than 2 people listening to him in his life, is suddenly at the center of something he has no name for. Saphira decides to blow a small cloud of smoke from her nostrils. The crowd first goes silent, then cheers even louder. Eragon tells her, "Do not show off." She waves her tail. Trondheim has 4 corridors leading to the central hall, where Isidar Mithram hangs under the ceiling. The star rose, a sapphire 20 paces wide, carved like a flower and throwing pink-red light over everything. Above it, at the top of the mountain, is the Dragonhold, an open hall under the sky with caves carved into the walls where the riders' dragons once slept. Saphira flies there without asking. Ajihad is exactly what the leader of an organization fighting for 20 years against a king with dragons should be. Tall, calm, with a face that gives away nothing for free, and a voice that sounds as if every word was chosen, weighed, and approved before it left his mouth. He tells Eragon everything he knows. Saphira's egg had moved for years between the Varden and the Elves, Brahm's compromise, so both sides would have a chance to receive a rider. Arya was carrying it from Trondheim to the Elves when Durza ambushed her. Urgils under his command killed her escort, and Durza captured her and tortured her for months in Gilead. Before they took her, she managed to send the egg magically toward Brahm. It landed in the spine instead of reaching him because she had no time to aim. Without that mistake, Eragon would never have found it. The Urgils are allied with the Empire. The shade they did not kill, Murdoch shot him between the eyes, but a shade disappears and returns stronger unless you pierce the heart. A strange parchment taken from an Urgil commander has orders signed Ushnark, an elven word meaning father, the name Urgils use for Galbatorix. At the end, Ajihad looks at Eragon and says, "The Varden have 4,000 people. Galbatorix has an army 16 times larger." The elves stopped helping when Arya disappeared, and the dwarf clans fear dragons from every age. Then he asks what Eragon wants. Eragon says he will not allow himself to be used against his will. Ajihad does not look offended. He says that this is exactly what he wanted to hear. He adds that people will come to Eragon with problems, from great ones to painfully small ones, and that Eragon will have to speak carefully, because his words will carry more weight than he intends. He says the heaviest burden of a leader is responsibility for the people under him. He says it without drama, like someone who has carried that burden for years and has learned not to make speeches about it. Eragon gets Zarok and Brahm's ring back. Murtagh stays in a cell, not because he has done anything wrong, but because he is Morzen's son, and the twins can physically control him, which is the only reason he was allowed in at all. Ajihad clearly regrets this, but he cannot do otherwise. Oric turns out to be King Hrothgar's nephew, and the only person in Farthandur so far who has acted like a person instead of part of a procedure. For disobeying the twins, opening the gates, pulling Eragon from the water, stopping the torture, he is punished by being removed from battle duty and made Eragon's personal guide. Ajihad does this with clear satisfaction, because Oric answers both to him and to Hrothgar, and this punishment is made so that neither ruler can complain. Oric is happy about it and smokes his pipe with the face of someone who thinks everything went according to plan. Eragon is given an audience with Hrothgar, who is old and sits on a deliberately uncomfortable throne, because dwarves believe a throne should remind a ruler of duties, not privileges. 41 dead kings look down at Eragon with stone faces, and Hrothgar tells him directly, "Dwarves do not like dragons, they do not like riders, and to earn their respect one must do it with deeds, not words." Eragon has no chance to argue, because that same evening brings something else. At the gate of Trondheim stands an old woman. She holds a baby. When Saphira comes out of the tunnel, the woman grabs Eragon's foot with both hands and does not let go. She asks for a blessing. The child is an orphan, with no one except the old woman, who is weak herself. She says, "Bless her, Argat Lamb." Eragon does not know how to bless anyone. In Alagaësia, a bad or unwilling blessing can become a curse. There is no ready text. He sits on Saphira. The crowd below grows silent and watches, and suddenly he remembers that he knows the ancient language, words that are true by nature, not by custom. He removes his glove. He puts his hand on the child's forehead. "Atragulia unilian tauter, ono unatra ono vices colir frarauder." Saphira nods, and without warning lowers her head, touching the baby's forehead with the tip of her nose. When she pulls back, a star-shaped silver-white mark remains on the child's skin. The crowd takes a deep breath. Eragon does not understand what he has just done. During the flight to the Dragonhold, Saphira tells him that he gave the child a future and she gave her hope. A girl with a dragon mark will not become a tavern worker. Maybe that sounds small. It is not. Every age needs a symbol, Saphira says. Maybe that role has fallen to you. Eragon says it overwhelms him, that he feels like he is in a dream, where everything's possible and none of those possible things belongs to him. A farm boy who carried the name of the first rider for no reason, and now a shade had fought him in Gilead. Morzan's son had traveled with him across half the country, and a crowd in an underground city roars at the sight of his dragon. "You are a hatchling learning the world," Saphira answers. "Accept where you are and who you are." Angela has been in Trondheim for a month. She lives on an abandoned level, hides from the twins, who wanted to force her into their group of magicians, and treats the whole situation with academic amusement. Solomon brings Eragon to her without warning. Angela tells him about Brahm, what Brahm himself never said. Brahm was cursed. Literally, not metaphorically. Everything he began ended in failure except one thing, killing Morzan. He managed that. It was enough. For a moment, Eragon thinks about the woman Brahm loved and the misfortune his love brought her, about the dragon who died, about the fact that Brahm spent his life guarding the egg, teaching a boy he did not want to teach, and in the end, instead of dying in battle, died from poison the Razak had given him in dust. Life goes on, Angela says. We should not trouble the dead with our worries. Eragon also receives a message from the twins. They want him to join their group of magicians, called Duvrangr Gada. The offer sounds polite. Eragon understands that they want access to the words of the ancient language that Brahm taught him. He answers, no. The twins tell him they will test his magical skills and that they can make it unpleasant. Eragon says he will consider it. All of them know he will not. Arya appears on the practice field out of nowhere, wearing black leather, with a sword at her side, only 2 days after lying half dead on Saphira's back. Eragon does not even have time to think what to say when Arya looks at the twins and tells them to be ashamed, then says to Eragon, draw your weapon. The fight lasts a long time. Eragon has never fought an elf before. Brahm warned him that even the weakest elf can defeat a human. But a warning is not the same as standing before someone who blocks every blow with the light grace of someone warming up. Eragon attacks with every series of moves he knows. Arya keeps up with him. When she finally touches his jaw with her blade and ends the fight, the warriors around them cheer so loudly that for a moment Eragon thinks he has won. He has not, but he has passed. That same day, Arya comes to him on the hill behind the practice field and tells him what really happened on the road from Trondheim. How Durza prepared the ambush, how he killed her escort, and how for months in Gilead she kept her mind defended so she would not reveal Elismera. She says it without drama, dryly, like a report. Eragon listens and understands that he saved someone who had fought alone for so long that she had learned not to expect rescue. At the end, she tells him that her identity, the Yaoi tattoo on her shoulder, the mark of the elves' highest trust, must not be revealed. Eragon promises. She also gives him advice. Brahm's ring, the same symbol as Arya's tattoo, will protect him if he meets elves. Nasuada, Ajihad's daughter, 17 years old, who climbs the stairs to the dragon hole because she wanted to deliver her father's message personally, looks like a princess and behaves like someone already playing political games before her father even notices the game exists. Eragon feels it and does not yet know what to do with it. Ajihad puts the pieces together. Urgals have been moving there all year, under Durza's orders, and through him under Galbatorix's orders. That many Urgals have only one purpose, to destroy Farthendur and the dwarves and Varden together. An hour later, a half-conscious dwarf runs out of an abandoned tunnel under Trondheim and says, they are coming. 1 day's march away. They are in the tunnels. For several hours, Eragon and Arya strike the rock with magic, collapsing side tunnels, so the Urgals will have to move in directions the Varden have prepared. Dwarves who surrender their pride are given armor from the treasury. Saphira has brought a chest of metal plates. Dragon armor, the last complete set, forgotten for centuries. For a good half hour, Eragon and Oric fasten it onto Saphira. When they finish, the dragon bends her neck to test it and the armor moves without a sound. You look dangerous, Eragon says. Good, Saphira answers. The battle in Farthendur begins with pitch. Cauldrons are tipped into the tunnel openings, and the first screams rise from below. Soon after, Urgals come through the fire, trampling their own wounded and form a wall of bodies. The archers release the first volley. The Urgals raise shields. A second volley follows, and then whole armies crash together with a sound heard on the other side of the crater. Eragon fights from Saphira's back, then on foot because Zarok gets stuck in a coal's horns and he has to pull it free. Then back on Saphira, then on the ground again. Murdoch fights beside him on Tornag, his face twisted in such deep focus that it looks like a festival mask. Hrothgar, with his hammer Voland, cuts down 3 Urgals with one swing. And in the middle of the battle, Eragon feels a moment of pure childish admiration for someone so old who still fights, as if no other option exists. Angela appears from nowhere in green armor and with a double-bladed weapon on both ends of a staff, and saves his life when a blow to his helmet stuns him for a moment. Solomon fights beside her as a boy with a black dagger and a hunter's smile. The twins do not answer mental contact. Later it turns out they were fighting somewhere else. Eragon is never completely sure if he believes that story. Saphira falls through the roof of Trondheim, not because of stupidity, because of a choice. When Eragon warns her through the bond about Durza, Arya is halfway through taking off Saphira's damaged armor. Saphira's chest armor is bent and she's breathing with difficulty, slowly, too slowly to fly properly. Volturin, the endless staircase, has 1,000 levels. By the time Eragon ran down, the shade would have closed everything. There's only one option. Isidar Mithrim. The star rose, the sapphire 20 paces wide, hanging under Trondheim's roof, breaks under Arya's strike from above. It explodes into thousands of razor-sharp pieces, and with the pieces falls Saphira, Arya on her back, jaws open, yellow-blue fire between her teeth. Eragon stands in the central hall of Trondheim and looks up. Durza speaks a spell. Eragon is on his knees, his back cut from shoulder to hip. The pain so great it pushes away every other thought, every word, everything except a narrow corridor of awareness where there is still some energy left, energy that should have ended long ago. Brizinger. Zarok burns. A thrust. Durza tears apart from the inside. Darkness pours out of his skin, splits into 3 shapes, and escapes through the walls of Trondheim and out of Farthendur. The Urgals stare in silence, as if the spell connecting them to their commander broke with him. Then the clans turn against one another, and within minutes the whole army collapses into its own civil war. Arya holds thousands of sapphire pieces in the air before they hit the floor. Then she lowers them slowly. Eragon loses consciousness. When he wakes, Angela is sitting beside the bed and tells him he was unconscious for a day and a half. Healing him took as much energy as she could gather. Murdoch has a bandage on his head and is clearly happy to be alive. Saphira has arrow holes in her wings and intends to ignore them. Arya has a bandage on her arm and the face of someone who calculated the cost and paid it knowingly. Eragon asks about his back. The scar runs from his right shoulder to his left hip. Eragon lies still for a moment and looks at the ceiling. Inside him there is a voice, strange, calm, as if coming from the depth of something much older than anything Eragon has ever met. It says it protected him while he was unconscious. Ostato Herawa, the morning sage, and Togura Ikanoka, the cripple who is whole. It says, trust Arya, go to the elves, I will be there. I have answers to all your questions. Eragon asks how to find him. The voice says that Elismera is in Du Veldenvarden and that he must hurry. Then there is silence. Eragon looks at the ceiling for a little longer. Then he closes his eyes and thinks that Braum would be proud of him. He does not know where the thought comes from, but it is there, calm and certain, as if someone left it there on purpose. He turns Braum's ring on his finger. Du Veldenvarden, Elismera, elves who have not seen a rider for centuries. Be ready for anything. Saphira had warned him once. Eragon decides that this is still true. And that's how the story of the first book, Eragon, ends. From a normal boy to a dragon rider. But the real conflict is only just beginning, because the battle with Galbatorix is still ahead.